You really expect to hit anything with that museum piece, Chief? Or did you just pull it out of surplus bin for show? The voice, belonging to Gunnery Sergeant Miller, was a gravelly buzzsaw of condescending authority, cutting through the tense quiet of the high desert night. The crowd of younger Marines and a few visiting operators from other branches rippled with nervous laughter, the sound sharp and cruel under the cold sodium lights of the observation deck. They stood arrayed behind the firing line at the military's most advanced long-range training facility, a place where legends were forged and egos were systematically dismantled. Tonight, it seemed, was Gunny Miller's turn to do the dismantling. His target was the lone figure at firing point 7, a Navy Master Chief Petty Officer whose very presence seemed to be an affront to his sensibilities. She was smaller than the rest, her frame lean and wiry, lacking the overt, blocky musculature of the operators around her. She didn't carry herself with the swagger they did. Instead, she moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving, a quiet fluidity that seemed to absorb sound and attention rather than project it. But it was her rifle that had drawn the gunny's ire. In a line of state-of-the-art M210S and carbon fiber chassis systems, her weapon looked like an artifact. It was an older model, its wooden stock worn smooth and dark in places where a human hand and cheek had rested for thousands of hours. The bluing on the barrel was faded to a soft gray, and the scope, while clearly high quality, was mounted on a base that showed the faint scars of 100 adjustments. The Master Chief, whose name tag read Sharma, offered no verbal response to the insult. Her non-reaction was a vacuum in the charged atmosphere. She didn't flinch, her jaw didn't tighten, her eyes didn't even flicker towards the source of the ridicule. Instead, she continued her task, her hands moving with the unthinking grace of a concert pianist. She drew a soft, oil-stained cloth from a pouch on her belt and slowly, methodically, wiped down the stock of the rifle. It was a gesture of care, almost of reverence, a silent communion with the tool in her hands. From the darkened control tower high above the range, retired Marine General Wallace watched the scene unfold on a high-resolution monitor, the audio feed piping Miller's voice directly into his headset. He had seen 1,000 hotshot instructors like Miller, men whose competence was eclipsed only by their arrogance. But his eyes were fixed on the woman at point 7. He saw past the unassuming frame and the weathered rifle. He saw the stance. It was a subtle thing, invisible to the untrained eye. The way her feet were planted, the slight cant of her hips, the perfect relaxation in her shoulders. It was a foundation built not in a few weeks of sniper school, but over a decade of relentless practice in the most unforgiving environments on Earth. It was the stance of a true professional, a quiet master of a violent craft. He leaned forward, a flicker of recognition in his old eyes. He had seen a stance like that only once before, many years ago, in a dusty corner of Afghanistan. He keyed his microphone, speaking to his aide. "Give me the personnel file for the operator at firing point 7. Now, if you believe that true respect is earned in silence, not shouted from a soapbox, type earned in the comments below. This story is for you." Gunny Miller, emboldened by Sharma's silence, took it as a sign of weakness, a confirmation of his own superior judgment. He sauntered down from the observation deck, his boots crunching on the gravel path, the sound deliberately loud. He stopped a few feet behind her, crossing his thick arms. "Look, Chief," he began again, his voice dripping with false patience. "This is the Joint Special Operations Precision Marksman course. This isn't some Navy qualification you can pencil whip on the fantail of a destroyer. We're dealing with sub-MOA groupings at over 1,000 meters, with shifting wind variables and high-angle shots. That thing," he gestured dismissively at her rifle, "belongs over a fireplace, not on my range. I can't, in good conscience, sign off on you proceeding with this level of inadequate equipment. It's a safety hazard and an embarrassment to the other shooters." The other operators shuffled their feet, the initial amusement souring into discomfort. They were all Tier 1 or on the path to it. They understood the brutal meritocracy of their world, but they also understood the unwritten rules of professional courtesy. Miller was crossing a line, turning a training exercise into a personal crusade. Sharma finished wiping the rifle, folded the cloth into a perfect square, and tucked it away. She still hadn't looked at him. Her focus was entirely forward, down the long, dark corridor of the range, where unseen targets waited in the gloom. The air was cold, carrying the scent of sagebrush and cordite from a previous firing detail. The only light came from the faint, distant illumination of the target pits and the harsh overhead lamps of the firing line, which cast long, distorted shadows. Her movements remained deliberate, unhurried. She adjusted the bipod, feeling the subtle click as the legs locked into place. She checked the torque on her scope rings with a small, specialized wrench, her fingers moving with a surgeon's precision. Every action was a testament to a deeply ingrained process, a ritual performed countless times before in places far more dangerous than this. Miller interpreted this meticulous preparation as novice-level insecurity. "Are you even listening to me, Master Chief?" he snapped, his frustration finally boiling over. "I'm the chief instructor on this range. My word is final. I need a verbal confirmation that you understand the deficiency of your platform for the first time." Sharma spoke. Her voice was low and calm, devoid of any inflection. "I understand you have concerns, Gunnery Sergeant, that was it. No defense, no explanation, no anger. Just a simple, factual acknowledgement that his words had been heard." The sheer, unadorned neutrality of her response seemed to infuriate Miller more than any argument could have. It was like punching water. He was a man who thrived on conflict, on the back and forth of dominance and submission. Her placid composure gave him no purchase. "Concerns? I have standards. The Marine Corps has been defining the art of the rifleman for over 200 years. We don't show up to work with antiques. We show up with tools calibrated for mission success." He was practically shouting now, his face reddening under the lights. High in the tower, General Wallace watched the display, a grim set to his jaw. The file he had requested had just appeared on his screen. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page. He went very still. He read it again, then slowly scrolled down, his expression shifting from curiosity to profound, solemn respect. He looked back at the live feed of the woman on the range, no longer seeing just a quiet operator, but a living legend. "Gunny," he murmured to himself, "you have no idea who you're talking to." The automated announcement system crackled to life, its synthesized voice cutting through the tension. "Phase 1 of the night qualification will commence in 60 seconds. Shooters, prepare your equipment. Stand by for target assignment." This was the moment of truth. The course was infamous, a brutal test of skill known as the Whispering Death for its complexity and unforgiving standards. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting static targets at known distances. The system would present a series of 5 reactive steel targets at randomized, unknown ranges from 600 to 1,200 meters. They would be partially obscured, exposed for only a few seconds at a time, and illuminated by a brief, faint chemical light stick. Shooters had to calculate range, windage, and lead in seconds, all in near total darkness, and place a single, perfect shot on each target before it vanished. To pass, a shooter needed to hit 4 of the 5. To achieve a perfect score was considered nearly impossible. It had only been done twice in the facility's history. Gunny Miller smirked, stepping back. "All right, Chief. Let's see what that relic can do." "Don't hurt yourself." Sharma ignored him, her entire being now focused on the task at hand. She settled behind the rifle, her body melting into the earth of the firing position. The worn wooden stock didn't just rest against her shoulder. It became part of it. The rifle was not a separate object, but an extension of her will, a conduit for her intent. The narrator could almost feel the history humming within the aged wood and steel. She took a slow, deep breath, then let half of it out, finding the natural respiratory pause where the human body is most still. Through the powerful optics, the desert night transformed into a ghostly green landscape. Her left hand gently supported the rear of the stock. Her fingers curled into a loose fist, allowing for minute, almost imperceptible adjustments. The world outside the scope ceased to exist. There was no Gunny Miller, no audience, no cold desert air. There was only the reticle, the wind, and the waiting darkness. "Targets active," the synthesized voice announced. Far downrange, a faint green glow appeared, a small, man-sized silhouette barely visible behind a simulated barricade. The laser rangefinder integrated into her scope gave her a reading, 874 meters. She felt the wind on her cheek, a gentle but inconsistent crosswind from the right. Her mind became a biological computer, processing the variables in an instant. She didn't consciously think about the math. She simply knew. Her right thumb made a series of tiny, precise clicks on the elevation and windage turrets of her scope. The movements were so small, so practiced, they were almost invisible. She settled the crosshairs, leading the target by a hair. She took the slack out of the trigger. Her breathing stopped. The world narrowed to a single point of green light. Then, a gentle press. The rifle didn't roar. It cracked a single, sharp report that was shockingly clean. The recoil was a familiar push, managed and absorbed by her perfectly structured position. Through the scope, she saw the green light wink out an instant before the distant, satisfying thwack of the bullet striking steel reached her ears. Silence. Before anyone could process the first shot, a second light bloomed, this time further out and to the left, a sliver of a target visible between two mock rock formations. 1,012 meters. The wind was trickier here, swirling in a small valley. Again, the whisper-quiet clicks of the turrets. Again, the calm, control breath. Again, the sharp crack. And again, the sound of a perfect hit echoing back from the darkness. The sequence became a symphony of lethal precision. A third target at 650 meters, a fourth at a staggering 1,150. Each one presented a unique problem of angle, distance, and wind. Each problem was solved by Sharma in seconds, with an unnerving, machine-like calm. The small crowd behind the firing line was no longer snickering. They were utterly silent, their bodies leaning forward as if drawn by a magnetic force. They were witnessing something that defied their understanding of the possible. They were watching a master at work, and the experience was both humbling and terrifying. Gunny Miller stood frozen, his arms slack at his sides, his jaw hanging open. Every arrogant assumption, every cynical judgment was being systematically dismantled with each crack of that relic rifle. The weapon he had dismissed as a piece of junk was performing with a consistency that his own unit's multi-thousand-dollar systems rarely achieved. But he knew, with a sickening certainty, that it wasn't the rifle. It was the woman behind it. It was the seamless fusion of operator and equipment, a bond forged in fire and time that he had been too blind and too prejudiced to see. Finally, the ultimate test, the fifth and final target. The system saved the impossible shot for last. A single red chem light activated at the maximum effective range of the course. A small circular plate just 10 inches in diameter, positioned over 1,300 meters away. To make it even more difficult, the system activated a wind machine near the target, creating a chaotic, unpredictable microclimate. It was the course's designated ego killer, the shot that separated the experts from the legends. The red light glowed, a malevolent eye in the vast darkness. The digital display on Sharma's scope read 1,320 meters. A gust of wind kicked up dust on the range, and she paused, her finger resting just off the trigger. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, not looking but feeling. She felt the shift in the air on her neck, the whisper of the current as it moved through the sagebrush. It was an instinct, a sixth sense for the ways of the wind that could only be learned by spending a lifetime listening to it. She opened her eyes. The turrets clicked once more. She adjusted her hold, aiming not at the target, but at a patch of empty black air to the upper left of it. It looked wrong. It looked like a guaranteed miss to anyone watching. She exhaled. The rifle cracked one last time. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing. The red light continued to glow. A few of the younger Marines started to exhale, thinking she had finally missed. Miller allowed himself a fleeting moment of vindicated hope. Then, a faint ping traveled back across the immense distance, a sound so small it was almost imaginary. The red light vanished. A perfect score. 5 targets, 5 impossible shots, 5 perfect hits. A deafening, absolute silence fell over the range. It was a silence filled with awe, disbelief, and a profound sense of humility. Into that silence, a single, soft metallic sound dropped. Sharma calmly worked the bolt on her rifle, ejecting the final, spent casing. It spun through the air, catching the light for a brief moment before landing on the concrete beside her. She didn't look at the scoreboard, which was now flashing 5 green lights. She didn't look at the stunned faces of the men behind her. She simply began the methodical process of making her rifle safe, her movements as calm and deliberate as they had been from the very beginning. Her work was done. The statement had been made. The heavy door of the control tower opened and General Wallace emerged, stepping out into the cold night air. The operators on the observation deck, including Gunny Miller, snapped to attention. The general was a living icon, a man whose exploits in force recon were the stuff of Marine Corps lore. His presence on the range was rare, reserved for only the most significant training evolutions. For him to come down to the firing line himself was unheard of. He walked with a slow, deliberate gait, his eyes fixed on firing point 7. He ignored everyone else, his focus absolute. He moved past the rigid, stunned form of Gunny Miller as if he weren't even there. The silence on the range was now thick with anticipation. What was about to happen? Was he going to reprimand the Navy chief for some unknown infraction? Congratulate her? The uncertainty was palpable. Wallace stopped directly in front of Sharma, who had just finished securing her rifle and was preparing to stand. She looked up, her expression neutral, acknowledging his presence with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The general, a man who had commanded thousands and faced down enemies across the globe, looked at the quiet Master Chief with an expression of profound, unadulterated respect. He then turned his gaze to Gunny Miller, and his voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute authority across the entire firing line. "Gunnery Sergeant Miller," he said, his tone dangerously calm. "Give me the official shooter's roster for this detail." Miller fumbled with the tablet computer strapped to his wrist, his hands shaking slightly. He tapped the screen several times before the right file appeared. He held it out wordlessly. Wallace didn't take it. "Read me the name for firing point 7, he commanded. Miller swallowed hard. "Charmant, Oignon. Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy." His voice was hoarse. General Wallace nodded slowly. "That is her name. But it's not who she is." He pulled out his own encrypted datapad, its screen glowing in the darkness. "Let me tell you who she is." He began to read, his voice clear and strong, each word landing like a hammer blow. "Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, formerly assigned to SEAL Team 6. Call sign Echo. Combat déploiement, Suivantine. Classification, top secret/code word. Recipient of the Navy Cross, the Silver Star with 2 clusters, the Bronze Star with Valor, and 4 Purple Hearts." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. The crowd was breathless. They weren't just in the presence of an expert marksman. They were in the presence of a hero of the highest caliber, a ghost of the secret wars who had walked through hell and back, again and again. "Her confirmed engagement record is redacted at a level I can't even access," Wallace continued, his eyes boring into Miller. "But I can tell you this. The official Navy Sniper School record for the longest confirmed combat kill was set at 2,140 meters. That record was held for 10 years by a legendary SEAL named David Kane. It was broken 3 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan during a hostage rescue operation. The new record is 2,475 meters. The shot was taken at dusk in a high wind at a moving target. That shot was taken by Master Chief Sharma." General Wallace lowered his datapad, the silence on the range now so complete it felt like a physical pressure. He looked down at the battered rifle that Sharma was now holding, its wooden stock seeming to glow with a history of its own. "And this rifle," he said, his voice softening with reverence, "is not a museum piece, Gunny. It's not a relic. It is a legacy." He looked from the rifle back to Sharma, and then addressed the entire group of stunned operators. "This rifle belonged to Master Chief David Kane. He was Anya Sharma's mentor. He was killed in action on the very operation where she broke his record, shielding his team from enemy fire. She carried him off that mountain, and she has carried his rifle ever since. Not because it's old, but because it is a promise to uphold a standard, to honor a legacy of quiet professionalism that you, Gunny, were too arrogant and too ignorant to recognize." The general's words were a public indictment, a formal stripping away of Miller's authority and credibility. He then turned his steely gaze directly on the gunnery sergeant. Assumptions are the enemy of competence, Gunny Miller. They're the currency of fools. You looked at one of the finest warriors this nation has ever produced, and you saw only what your prejudice allowed you to see. You saw a woman. You saw a different branch of service. You saw an old piece of equipment. You failed to see the professional. You failed to see the warrior. And in doing so, you not only disrespected her, you dishonored the very standards you claimed to uphold. The shaming was absolute, delivered with the cold, precise finality of an execution. There was no defense Miller could offer. He stood there, his face pale, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. General Wallace then did something that sent a shockwave through the assembled group. He turned to face Master Chief Sharma. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. In a gesture of profound respect that transcended service rivalry and rank, the legendary two-star Marine General rendered a slow, perfect, formal salute to the Navy Master Chief Petty Officer. It was a salute from one warrior to another, a silent acknowledgement of her skill, her sacrifice, and the quiet dignity with which she carried her immense burden. Sharma, for the first time, showed a flicker of emotion. Not surprise, but a deep, solemn understanding. She didn't return the salute. Protocol dictated otherwise, but she met the general's eyes and gave a single, crisp nod. It was enough. The gesture sealed the moment in time, a silent exchange that spoke more about honor, respect, and the true meaning of service than 1,000 words ever could. The quiet professional had been vindicated, not by her own words, but by her undeniable competence and the validation of a wise and honorable leader. The story of that night spread through the secretive world of special operations like a flash fire. It wasn't the kind of story that made headlines or official reports. It traveled through more subtle channels. It was whispered in the mess halls of distant forward operating bases, typed in encrypted chats between team members deployed across the globe, and recounted with a kind of hushed reverence in the bars and briefing rooms where these quiet professionals gathered. It became known as the Night of the Echo, a nod to Sharma's call sign and the way her single shot had echoed through their entire community, silencing doubters and reinforcing a core truth. It became a modern fable, a cautionary tale about the mortal sin of underestimation. The legend wasn't just about the impossible shooting. It was about the quiet strength, the unshakable composure in the face of public ridicule. It was the story of the battered rifle, which became a potent symbol of legacy and the sacred trust between mentors and their protégés. The physical proof of the event, the final 10-inch steel plate from 1,320 meters, was recovered from the range the next morning. The bullet hole was perfectly centered, a small, dark circle of absolute perfection. By order of General Wallace, it was mounted on a large mahogany plaque and hung in the main briefing hall of the training facility, a place where every operator, present and future, would see it. Beneath it, a simple, engraved brass plate delivered the enduring lesson. Assumptions are the enemy. M. C. P. O. Sharma, Gunnery Sergeant Miller, was not formally disciplined. General Wallace knew that the public humiliation he had endured was a far more effective corrective than any official reprimand. The experience broke Miller, but it did not destroy him. Instead, it reshaped him. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, and what was left was a humbled, reflective man. The following afternoon, he found Master Chief Sharma in a quiet, sunlit corner of an armory, meticulously cleaning her mentor's rifle. The weapon was completely disassembled, each tiny pin and spring laid out on a soft cloth in perfect order. She worked with the same silent, focused intensity she displayed on the firing line. Miller stood at a respectful distance for a full minute before she finally looked up, her eyes calm and questioning. He didn't offer excuses or justifications. He met her gaze and spoke with a sincerity he hadn't known he possessed. "Master Chief," he said, his voice low and steady, "there is no excuse for my behavior last night. I was arrogant, I was unprofessional, and I was wrong. It was an honor to witness your skill." Sharma paused her work, wiping a smudge of carbon from her finger with a clean patch of cloth. She studied the man before her, seeing not the loud-mouthed antagonist from the night before, but someone who had been forced to confront a deep flaw within himself. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. Her response, like all her actions, was simple, direct, and devoid of unnecessary drama. She gave him the same crisp, single nod she had given the general. It was an acceptance of his apology, a quiet signal that the matter was closed and that they could move on. Forgiveness, in her world, was not about words. It was about acknowledging a corrected error and focusing on the mission ahead. But she did one more thing. She gestured to a young Marine sniper who was struggling at a nearby workbench, trying to properly mount a new scope. "Help him with his parallax adjustment, Gunny," she said softly. "His technique is solid, but his setup is flawed." It was a masterstroke of leadership. In that single moment, she was not only forgiving Miller, but also restoring a piece of his purpose. She was acknowledging his expertise as an instructor and redirecting his energy toward a positive, professional act. She was teaching him, through her own example, that true authority comes from competence and mentorship, not from volume and intimidation. Miller looked at the young Marine, then back at Sharma, and a look of profound understanding dawned on his face. "Yes, Master Chief," he said, and the words were imbued with a newfound respect. He walked over to the young Marine and began to teach, his voice now patient and encouraging. Sharma returned to her work, the rhythmic sound of her cleaning rod swishing through the rifle barrel filling the quiet room. She was not a person who reveled in victory or held onto grudges. Her focus was always on the next task, the next mission, the enduring standard. In the days that followed, operators would see her on the range, not as a shooter, but as a mentor. She would spend hours with young snipers from every branch, never lecturing, but quietly observing. She would adjust a shooter's grip with a gentle touch, point out a subtle shift in the wind that they had missed, or show them a breathing technique that calmed their heart rate. Her philosophy of quiet competence was infectious. She taught that the rifle was merely a tool. The true weapon was the mind, disciplined by relentless practice and fortified by an unshakable inner calm. The legend of the battered rifle grew, but the woman at the center of it remained unchanged, humble, focused, and utterly professional. A year passed. The seasons changed in the high desert, but the story of that night remained, hardening from fresh gossip into institutional folklore. The plaque with the bullet hole target became a landmark at the facility. New students on the Joint Special Operations course were brought before it on their first day, and an instructor would tell them the story of Master Chief Sharma and her mentor's rifle. It became the foundational lesson of the entire program, a stark, powerful reminder that skill recognizes no gender, no service branch, and no superficial appearance. It taught them to look for competence in the quiet corners, to respect the unassuming professional, and to mercilessly question their own biases before judging another operator. The most profound change, however, was in gunnery Sergeant Miller. He had requested to stay on as the chief instructor, a decision that surprised his superiors. But he wasn't the same man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady authority rooted in hard-won humility. He had become the facility's most effective and respected teacher. At the direction of General Wallace, a new module was added to the curriculum for all incoming special operations candidates. It was called Cognitive Bias in Operator Assessment, and it focused on the psychological traps and prejudices that could lead to catastrophic failures in judgment on and off the battlefield. The lead instructor for this new, mandatory block of training was Gunnery Sergeant Miller himself. He would stand before each new class of elite warriors, in front of a projected image of Sharma's bullet hole target, and he would tell the story. He never spared himself in the telling. He recounted his own arrogant words, his own blindness, his own public shaming, with brutal honesty. "I was the fool in this story," he would tell them, his voice resonating with the power of lived experience. "I looked at a master and saw a novice. I looked at a hero and saw an inconvenience. My assumptions almost made me miss a lesson from one of the greatest professionals I have ever met. Do not make my mistake. Your ego is a greater threat to your mission than any enemy you will ever face on the battlefield. Look for the quiet ones. Watch their hands. Observe their process. True strength doesn't need to announce itself." His raw honesty made the lesson unforgettable. He had turned his greatest failure into his most powerful teaching tool, ensuring that the legacy of that night would be passed on not just as a story, but as a core principle of the modern special operator. Master Chief Anya Sharma was, of course, long gone from the training facility. She had rotated back to her unit and disappeared once more into the classified world she inhabited. She left no forwarding address, sought no accolades, and likely never knew the full extent of the impact she had made. For her, it was just another day at work. Her legacy was not something she consciously constructed. It was simply the natural byproduct of her unwavering commitment to excellence. But her presence remained. It lived in the changed attitude of the instructors, in a new curriculum that challenged ingrained biases, and in the story that was now woven into the very fabric of the institution. It lived in the young Marine sniper she had mentored, who went on to become a legend in his own right, always crediting the quiet Navy chief who taught him how to truly see the wind. Her legacy proved that true influence isn't about power or position. It's about the standards you set and the people you inspire to meet them. The battered rifle, a symbol of one man's memory, had become a symbol for an entire generation of warriors, a physical reminder that the most important traditions are not those of a single service branch, but the shared warrior ethos of honor, courage, and commitment. It represented the sacred duty to carry the lessons of the fallen forward, to ensure that their sacrifice continues to inform and guide the living. The story of that night became a touchstone, a clear and powerful illustration of a timeless truth. True strength is not found in the volume of a boast or the shine of new equipment. It is not defined by superficial metrics or confirmed by the applause of a crowd. It is found in the quiet places, in the stillness of a controlled breath before a difficult shot, in the steady hands that have practiced a task 10,000 times, in the calm mind that sees the solution while others are still yelling about the problem. It is the silent hum of practiced excellence, the unwavering discipline that performs to a standard, not an audience. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in a trophy case. It's what continues to move forward in the actions and beliefs of those you've touched. It's the quiet competence that becomes the new standard, the humbling lesson that reshapes a culture, the silence that, in the end, speaks louder and with more enduring power than any words ever could. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.